Well, joining me to have a further look at today's papers is Harrison Griffiths, political commentator with Young Voices UK. Good morning, Harrison.
Morning, James. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Well, let's start with the only story in town, really, this morning, Joe Biden withdrawing. Well, I'll put that question to you that I'm putting to the listeners this morning. How will history judge Joe Biden?
I think it depends an awful lot about what happens over the coming years. If Donald Trump wins this presidential election, I think Joe Biden will be the history books fall guy for it, because, as I think one of your previous callers alluded to, he has stayed in this race, I think, far beyond the point of viability, and he has left his party potentially a difficult situation to pick a successor and unite a campaign around a new figurehead. It's also possible that if in the coming years the US's deficit and national debt problems become a big issue, that Joe Biden will take a lot of the blame for not anticipating that as interest rates went up. His liquefied natural gas export ban could have potentially catastrophic consequences on European energy security. So remains to be seen very much, I think.
Good morning to Paul in Hove, who says history will be kind to Biden. He brought the country together after the insurrection. He's always been able to talk to his opponents, and he's brought dignity to the role and the office. Obviously, the big question now, Harrison, is who replaces him at the top of the ticket. I mean, it appears as if moves are afoot to almost have a coronation of Kamala Harris. Would that be right?
Yes, it would seem so. Biden and most senior Democrats, though notably not former President Barack Obama, have endorsed Harris. And I think that if they possibly can, they will try and give her a coronation at the convention. But the problem is it's not necessarily in their gift to do so. The vast majority of the delegates who are going to the Democratic National Convention are pledged to Joe Biden. They are now effectively released. So there is a big organisation effort on if they are going to coronate Harris. The very thing they want to avoid is what used to be the political norm in the United States, which is a contested convention. That may not look very good if you have multiple candidates representing multiple groups and ideas within the Democratic Party, basically going hammer and tongs at each other for a whole weekend when the party wants to project unity of purpose going forward, I think.
Yeah, and fascinatingly, the Democratic National Convention this year is being held in Chicago. The last time it was held in that city was in 1968, when it was a contested convention, and there were very chaotic scenes, not just inside the convention centre. There were Vietnam protests outside, scenes of violent chaos. The analogy actually extends because you had a Democratic president who was standing down, then LBJ, now Biden. You had a right-wing Republican bogeyman waiting in the wings, then Nixon, now Trump. So it will be interesting to see if the convention kicks off again in the same way it did back in 1968. I mean, talking of Donald Trump, it's interesting because last week, in the wake of the assassination attempt with the RNC happening in Milwaukee, there was a real sense that Donald Trump almost had already won the presidential election. Do we have to reevaluate that now? Is the election back on?
Well, I mean, to extend your analogy further, the thing that Kamala Harris, if it is indeed her, wants to avoid is the fate of Hubert Humphrey, who was the Democratic nominee in 1968 and Lyndon Johnson's vice president, once considered a rising star in the party, who was parachuted in because of the departure of the boss, I guess, in that sense, and lost in the end quite handily to Richard Nixon. So, going forward, I think a lot remains to be seen. But what I think is clear is that Harris has been consistently polling slightly more popular than Joe Biden, although nothing that would make you particularly optimistic as a Democrat. And I think she's got further to rise in that sense. She seems to have fewer problems among young and African-American voters, which Joe Biden was increasingly having a bit of difficulty with. I think her path to an electoral college majority runs through both the Sun Belt and the Sun Belt being kind of more southern states in the US have become more competitive over the last 10 years or so, and the traditional Rust Belt swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, where Biden was very much kind of banking the entire campaign. So very difficult to see. But to be honest, I think Nikki Haley, the former Republican governor of South Carolina who ran in the primary against Donald Trump, was quite wise in January when she said the winner of this campaign will be the one that drops their 80-year-old candidate first. I think there are now a lot of questions on Donald Trump, whose campaign was almost entirely geared up until yesterday towards fighting against Joe Biden, a uniquely weak candidate in many ways.
Yeah, I think he called into Fox News at one point last night in a kind of fit of rage because clearly he wanted to run against Joe Biden. And suddenly now questions will be raised about his age. He's 78, of course. We're going to talk more about the US presidential election and Biden dropping out after 5:30. Let's come on to politics in the UK. Obviously, the Conservatives still waiting to provide a bit of clarity as to how their leadership contest is going to play out. But a lot of talk as to who may emerge as the next Tory leader. In the Times today, the headline, Conservatives turn on Braverman as they reject attack to the right. Jeremy Hunt has urged the Tories to return to the centre ground as party big Bs turn against Suella Braverman. The Shadow Chancellor has said the Conservatives had lost our reputation for calm competence and urged the party not to imitate Nigel Farage in trying to win back voters. What is your sense of which direction the Conservative Party will head, Harrison, and where do you think it should head?
Well, I mean, we were talking a minute ago about the prospect of Kamala's coronation. There's definitely no such thing that's going to happen here. It's been pretty clear since the general election that nobody's backing down in the Conservative Party and that the factions are going all out against each other to win. And I think the kind of attacks coming from different parts of the Conservative Party on Suella Braverman today are good evidence of that. I genuinely have no idea where it's going to go next, because this is a real kind of seminal moment for the future of the Conservative Party, because in 2019 they won a landslide general election that probably killed them. They put together a coalition of voters and, crucially, a coalition of kind of elites. That's kind of meaning MPs and also kind of journalists, policy wonks, people around the party at the Westminster level who could not sustainably work together on a long-term basis. You couldn't have constituencies in the South that had very traditional Conservative leanings, with sort of wealthier backgrounds, preferred lower taxes, weren't so keen on Brexit, had quite a kind of cosmopolitan globalist outlook, versus the new group of voters they brought on in 2019 in the so-called Red Wall, who had been Labour for a very long time, had a more culturally conservative pro-Brexit outlook and liked government spending more than tax cuts. That's just never going to work as a coalition. And now they're at the point where they kind of have to choose a new direction. And if it is indeed Suella Braverman, I think that will be one that's kind of pointed more towards the new base that they created in 2019. But clearly, a lot of the MPs that are remaining are much more tilted towards the old-style Conservative coalition. So it really does remain to be seen how the Conservatives are going to navigate this, because to me, it looks like they're stuck completely in a rock and a hard place. You saw, I think, more than anything, the reason they lost the general election just a few weeks ago was because their rhetoric was very kind of right-wing on things like immigration, but their record of delivery was very much the opposite. So they just annoyed everybody. They can't do that again. They need to pick more of a lane and build a new coalition. And it's going to be incredibly difficult to piece that back together again.
Harrison, always great to chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, James.
That's Harrison Griffiths, political commentator with Young Voices UK.